everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to this Mondays at 3 masterclass with director LILEANA BLAIN-CRUZ and designer Adam Rigg on collaboration and building worlds. My name is Rachel Silverman. I'm the artist workshop producer at New York Theater Workshop. We have about 200 people with us right now on Zoom and about a little more than 50 on Facebook Live. So welcome everybody who's here and thank you so much for joining us. This masterclass is part of an array of virtual programming that New York Theater Workshop has put together in this time. Everything is offered free to our entire community, which includes you wherever you are. If this is your first time with us, if this is your 100th time with us, welcome. If you are in a position to support our work, we hope you would consider donating. You'll find a link to donate if you choose to do so in the chat on Zoom or in the comments on Facebook Live. The conversation today is going to be about 90 minutes. We'll hear from LILEANA and Adam for the first 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. If you have a technical or logistical question, you can put your question in the Q&A box on Zoom or in the comments on Facebook. When we get to the Q&A portion, if you're on Zoom, we're going to utilize the raise your hand feature, and then we will select folks who've raised their hands and offer the opportunity to unmute yourself, and we'll be able to hear your audio as you ask a question, and it'll not video, so it's sort of like a radio call-in. And if you want to type in a question instead, that's fine, and if you're on Facebook, you can type a question into the comments, and we will try to get to everything in the time that we have. So I'm very happy to bring on LILEANA and Adam. Just giving you brief bios on the two of them. LILEANA BLAIN-CRUZ is an award-winning director. Her recent projects include Anatomy of a Suicide at the Atlantic, Fefu and Her Friends at Theater for a New Audience, Girls at Yale, Mary Seacole at LCT3, and for New York Theater Workshop, Red Speedo and The House That Will Not Stand. And she is also a former 2050 Directing Fellow. And Adam Rigg is a 2015 Princess Grace Award and 3-time Henry Hughes Design Award nominee. Some select credits with LILEANA include The House That Will Not Stand at the Workshop and Fefu and Her Friends. So I'm so excited to bring them both on, and just a shout out to their recent production of Fefu that just got 5 Drama Desk nominations, including Outstanding Scenic Design and Outstanding Revival of a Play, and it was really amazing. So Adam and LILEANA, please come join me. Welcome.
Hi, yes! DJ LILEANA, what? Let's get hype, everybody! Okay, Adam is already embarrassed. I'm so excited about it. Here we go. Hi. Rachel just disappeared. Okay, Adam. What's up?
She left.
Welcome to our master class. So, woo! Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Adam.
How you doing?
Good.
Yeah.
Just want to acknowledge how insane this moment is. So I hope everybody is feeling okay, doing okay, not feeling too crazy. And I'm really grateful and excited to be here, and thanks to New York Theater Workshop for having us out here in this moment.
Yeah, it's a weird time. It's a weird thing to do, but it's fun.
Yeah. Just a warning, I'm gonna be looking at everybody in your eyes a little bit in the camera. It's gonna be so hype. I hope you feel my energy coming towards you. What? This is what it's like in my rehearsal and in my design meeting. So I hope you're ready for it. Okay, just a general overview of how this is gonna go. We realize that sometimes it's like kind of a mystery about like how designer and directors talk to each other. Like, what is that collaboration process like? How do people even decide to work together? What do they decide to work with each other on? And what is that collaboration process like? And how do you get something basically from the page to the stage? And so we just wanted to share that with you guys so that you guys can get a sense of like where we began, how we started, and then we'll share a couple of shows to talk about, basically use them as case studies about our process. Do you want to talk a little bit about?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think we both talked a lot about how we want to like demystify and deformalize the process, because I think like as we've like gone past grad school together and all of these things together, it's, you know, it's good to formalize things in your education, but that like letting go of a lot of that has kind of been, I think, a tenet of our work together. So it's, I think sharing that and engaging in that with everyone's going to be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how we met, Adam. How did we meet so long ago? In the days of yore.
Almost 10 years now, right?
Jesus Christ. Why did
10
you
years
do it
this
away?
year.
10 years ago.
10 years this year. Yeah.
Insane.
We met in first year set design class, but you were second year.
Yep.
Yeah, at Yale School of Drama in grad school.
Yep.
And like first day you rolled up and we're like, hey, first day.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then
go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying we like it was almost immediate, my obsession with you. Like just because like, you know, the process was so interesting, because it was like a chance. The training for us was obviously as designers, but the training for you was actually talking about design and listening to critiques in class. And I just thought that like I found your critiques and your engagement in our projects really exciting and really refreshing. I mean, every director in the class I found super interesting and really challenging in all of these, but you brought this like just like vibrancy to the conversation and ridiculousness and all of the things that I love in theater processes. And so I was like immediately obsessed. And so I spent like the first semester just trying to impress you.
Oh my God, people are gonna be judging us. Don't judge our love. So I was obsessed with Adam. Mainly, you know, one of the things that we were talking about, like, what does collaboration mean? What are we talking about? Like, how are we attracted to designers, and how are designers attracted to directors? And I think one of the things that Adam said, which I think is so true, is like shared aesthetic, right? Like how you see the world and how you perceive the world is going to be unique across everybody's different, and everybody sees things in different ways. And one of the things that I loved about Adam is that like he understood how I saw things. So like if I was talking about a particular color blue and like the way it lived and like that a certain kind of saturation, like I could trust Adam's eyes to like find that that color, that dynamic. So that's like one of the things that was like really exciting. So the first show that we worked on together was my thesis, and that was Dr. Faustus Lights the Light. So I just want to show you like we wanted to share like some of that research to show like a little bit like what that landscape looked like. So like maybe Rachel, we can go to that first slide. Yeah. So boom. Okay, so if you look at that little fox on the left with the neon going through it, like that's when I knew that Adam understood the worlds that I was interested in. Like the collision between like the natural and the unnatural like merged together. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like it was like our first meeting, we got drinks, right? Like we went to the new Rudy's, right? It hadn't just opened. Yeah. And we sat down. I printed out like 300 images, and every single one you were like, yes. And it's kind of been that ever since, which has always been like a really, I think, exciting thing, is that like there's just this like agreement and even like a disagreement of like it shouldn't be this, that you were bringing in images that I was like, oh my God, that's it, you know. Yeah.
So then if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see how that manifested. So I love me some dry ice. I love me some green. I love some neon lights, right? Just to kind of share like things that we love, that we kind of gravitate to. And also you can see that little fox on the left with the two ladies, Marguerite Ida and Helena Annabelle. If you don't know Dr. Faustus Lights the Lights, it's a Gertrude Stein opera / play, and it's amazing and worth a read. And that like adds to another aspect of our like design choices and like how we move through. One of the things that I really love about Adam's work is that like he cares so deeply about the dramaturgy, right? It's like nothing is separate from anything else, right? And I think we work really hard to, well, what some might call like a total theater, right? Like the design is just as important as the acting, is just as important as the play, is just as important as the other elements of design in the show. Like they each take an important weight, and we find a way to kind of fuse it together. And I think Adam is really amazing at finding a way to integrate like the ideas of the play and the ideas of that other designers are coming up with in order to arrive at a world and a landscape. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like what was like so fascinating about this process for us, and like so early in kind of my professional trajectory, was that like we met on this kind of like devised theater mentality of that, like the text is in the room, the design is in the room, the actors are in the room, the director's in the room, like all the designers are in the room together, like, and we are moving towards like the final event together, and we're invested. Like I think what has always been really refreshing, and I've been lucky, I think, in a lot of directors I've worked with, is that, like, you know, I think sometimes designers are the best dramaturgs in a lot of ways, because like we are taking this like outside view of everything, and we are watching and just looking, just like a director is, but you're also like in the bodies of actors and working with the playwright, and we're just kind of have this like outside position. And so it's like, it's been great, and I think really like helpful for like the rest of my career so far, to kind of how you immediately were like, what is the event? You know, like you didn't ask questions early on of like, you know, what like, what color are the walls? Any of these? You were like, what are we trying to make people feel? Like, when are we trying to scare them? When are we trying to make them laugh? When are we trying to make them cry? Like, and we're thinking of this whole approach from so early on, that's like, you know, it doesn't get marred down in like the doors and handles and all of those kinds of things, which is, I think, really, for me, what's been so exciting of working together, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like a question about making theater at all. I mean, guys, like, what is theater? Why are we making it? Why are we here? Why are we choosing to be in a room together? And I feel like that question is so even more present now, with the ability to not be and share space together, right? Like the question is like, what makes this theater, and why is it so necessary, and why does it feel so important to do now, and how to make a space feel alive as a result of that. Like, why do we need to be this? Why do we need to experience this in space? And for me, some dry ice and some boxes add to that experience of
some
life.
Dirt floor.
Yeah. Maybe we can take down this side. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to kind of see what that is like. One other thing that I was questioning for Adam, because I'm just going to throw in some random questions here, guys, just to mix it up, just so that we don't get boring and you're not like, oh my God, what's happening? Adam, why are you a designer? Why do you do set design? Why? What's the reason?
I mean, I was like raised in like a theater house, you know, like a theater and art house. And I remember like, so I was like I danced from a very young age, and like, I wasn't the best dancer. I was okay. I was good, but I was not great. And no, I think that like, as I got, you know, I think a lot of people in theater like start in like acting or dance or musical theater as a performer. That's how a lot of us first find our feet. And I immediately, like, you know, I was like the kid who would like fix the props on stage, or like when I would dance by something, I would like move the coffee pot to be in the right position. Because like as a child, maybe it's OCD, but maybe it's also like a deep belief in like the care and work that goes in from the beginning. And so for me, like as a designer, I had access at the beginning of, or early on in a process of creation, and that, like, I found that really interesting. And then also I just really like making spaces. I really enjoy I mean, I enjoy buying carpets for people's houses. I just enjoy like visual creation and like visual storytelling, and I like pretty things. I really do, and beautiful things. And so I think that's how I, you know, I landed in it. And then like I had the chance early on to like have teachers who, you know, saw what I liked and saw what I did, and were like, have you thought of set design? And so that's how I ended here, you know? Yeah. How did you become a director?
We don't have to answer that question, but I will say, you know, like thinking about, we can talk about it. I'm just thinking a little bit about like what you said about like our inspiration from like devised theater or downtown theater being like some of the like ways in which like we kind of grew up in the theater in some ways. I know that was really formative for me before coming to grad school, which was like seeing a lot of shows. So like seeing Romeo Castellucci and seeing like the shows of what was PS 122 and like, you know, looking at the work of Brandon Jacob Jenkins. If you're here, Brandon Jacob Jenkins, I see you. And like getting a chance to like see like work that was like rigorously involved in also aesthetics, you know what I mean? Like and how that could impact like the theatricality of a piece. And there was some theater that I was seeing that didn't feel like it was activating those spaces. And for me, I was like, no, this is such an opportunity, like theater as a visual space to kind of access some of the questions that existed there. And for me, it was also about who gets to operate and live inside of those spaces. So for me, I was like, I would see these like highly aestheticized universes, and I would only see certain kinds of people that could live in there. And that for me, I always felt like, but I can live in there. You know what I mean? Like my people, Black people, like queer people, like, you know what I mean? Like everybody can kind of like exist inside of that space. So who gets to operate in the center of that, and how that can be used to kind of like energize those stories was really exciting to me. So
and something we collaborated on, or like connected on immediately in school was like, you were referencing like what I think are like formative pieces of theater for me, like, you know, and formative pieces for like a huge like a part of our community. But like, you know, my early interest in theater wasn't like Chekhov and all of these like kind of canon pieces. Mine came from more of like the dance world into the kind of like devised theater around classic text and adaptations and all of that. But like that was where I first found my jam. And now like I've grown to like love the canon, and that's part of my interest. But yeah, I think that's immediately I was like, ooh, she's talking about things I like.
And Adam knows how to make everything beautiful, which is what I like. Let's talk about The House That Will Not Stand, which was our first show together at New York Theater Workshop. And I say first because New York Theater Workshop, you go produce more, right? Yeah. Okay, but Rachel, let's put up that slide. So The House That Will Not Stand, if you don't know, the play is an adaptation of La Casa de Bernarda Alba. And we were really excited to work with it. It's a play by Marcus Gardley, and it is set in New Orleans, right? And like New Orleans as a location was so integral to it. One, because it's basically looking at free women of color. One, that's interesting to me that history isn't necessarily known that well. Those people aren't necessarily at the center of the stage. And I think that like prioritizing their experience and their reality was really important to us. So some of the images that you're seeing here are from a trip that I took to New Orleans specifically to do research. And this house was one of the inspirations for the setting of the play. And this portrait is like based off of one of the characters of the play, who was a woman who was basically kind of like a healer slash seer. Congo Square kind of lives inside of the history of it. And then we look at one of the churches that was there. And so like part of our research together, or like our conversations together, like involves some of the like very essential, like what is actually happening in the play, like what is the play in relationship to, and like how do you identify like what's at the core of it. And for me, like these three like locations were kind of central to the story. And so then Adam, like thinking about like, how do you put that into theatrical space, or like, how do you take an entire house, which is a huge fucking problem. Oops, excuse my French. But it's a huge question, like how
huge
to get
fucking
that,
problem.
Like huge fucking problem. Huge, like how do you take that scale, and how do you take like what lives in kind of more surreal, like magical realism, like kind of abstract planes that exist in the play, and take both the real and the abstract and let that live in space. So Adam, do you want to talk a little bit about like where that took us?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about this, like these images first are like, these were images you took with your phone while you were down there, and you were able to like, you know, walk around these places and like feel the energy in a way. And so then you brought that back, and it created this kind of like this freedom that we had of like, you did a lot of the like dramaturgical effort early on for me as a designer. So then like when we moved to, so Rachel, if you go forward one to the next one. So this is like, oh, sorry, back one. back one to the other research. Like, yeah, so we were able to like, it freed us up a little bit in the researching because you'd already done this really great like on the ground research of the actual houses that the play was set in. So we were able to like jump out pretty early on to some like broader ideas. And so we did have some, you know, we did definitely kept going deeper into the like Creole mansions of Louisiana. But we were able to also, you know, get into more some contemporary artists and contemporary like deconstruction of architecture and all of these things. And we did land on this kind of interesting, I think interesting, like duality of the super classic, you know, historically accurate architecture with this like slices of modern kind of feeling to it. So if you go forward one now, so this is like sketches and how we kind of worked through that together. And the first one, Liliana hated.
I hated it. I was like, I don't know what this is. What is this?
And
like,
then it kept
where
like
there's no
rough.
Space. Like one person can stand in one box. Like how am I supposed to? Like you need like 3 sisters like, in one room. What am I supposed to do? Yeah.
It's like Bye Bye Birdie set in New Orleans. Like, but then like we kept going, and I think we went back to your images again of the house and kind of thought more about it. And we always knew that like, I think what's so like fascinating of working with you and a lot of directors is that you get down to the core really quickly of like what the experience of an audience member is. And for us, we really talked about with this one, like the sense of the like outside looking in, and these women kind of, you know, these Black women living in an area where they had power, and now, but always were kind of like dolls kept in a box. That's how they like, you know, manifested that power, was by white men giving it to them for looking at them essentially. And so creating this feeling of like seeing the whole box and feeling the whole thing was really important to you, but then also getting the sense of like these massive windows, people being able to see in all the time, and the shuttering of those windows when like this man has died and they've lost the you know, America has taken over and they're losing their rights. So like trying to like cage themselves in. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the like dichotomy that we were interested in, right? Which is like, one, the fact that these women lived in a certain level of opulence, but at what cost, right? Like the cost was their freedom. So like how to create a space that was both seemingly opulent and seeming to like give the sense of freedom, but was actually like the cage that was boxing them in, and how to make that feel seemingly free and also like a big prison, you know? And I think like one of the elements that's important in it is the storm, and like how to manifest the storm, and how to get at the sense of the house kind of collapsing or being shaken, right? And I think you did a kind of amazing job of using the shutters, right? Like that, both the passageway and the exit to freedom, right? Like these kind of large windows as a way of manifesting that tension that kind of resonated in the house itself.
Yeah, and I think like it's a good example of like there were a lot of like specific technical requests of the play. Like there was the staircase, there was the attic, there were like multiple rooms, there were, you know, there was like this request for a storm, there were these moments of like magic and the ghost in the space, and Makeda like having all of these kind of incantations and moments and like catharsis that she has. And like I think that's always like the hard thing when you're like having a conversation as a designer and director, is like you can have these huge conversations around ideas and like philosophies of design and all of these things, but like you can never lose complete sight of the technicalities and the very specific request of the script. And you can sometimes just, you know, say fuck it and I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do something else, because a play is a live thing. But like I think that's like, I think early on what was really great about our collaboration is we never got marred down in the like technical stuff, and that was always like you're always on your shit with that. I try to be on my shit with that, like, and so we're able to be like, yeah, but what about this? Which is how like the attic, that like catwalk, we can go forward one.
Yep.
I think would be really useful. So the top left is the model, and the other 3 are production photos. And Anton, who built the model, I know is watching. So shout out to Anton.
Yeah, Anton.
We miss you. But that's how that catwalk attic came, was that we just like could not find a place for the attic. And we also, I remember like early on we had all these like attic pieces above and stuff. And it's just like, you didn't want to give it away early on. And I think that's like what's so, I think like really important in conversations is thinking about the arc of the event and the arc of the design, just like you talk about the arc of the play. And so like when you first walked in, the hope was that you weren't hyper aware of the fact that like across the top in the bottom right image, you can see there's like a person up there and there, like that catwalk actually was an acting space as well. And there was a doorway halfway, 3/4 of the way through. And so it's always like, I don't know, I get excited working on things with you because you're just like, you think about this trajectory of like reveal and experience design wise that I think is like so refreshing and exciting.
Oh, geez, don't put these compliments. The thing is true for me, but I mean, I think one of the things that you see with like Adam's design, I'm thinking like particularly of the like image down to the right, is like thinking about like how space creates opportunity for image, right? And composition, which for me is like really important, right? If I'm thinking about it as a visual art as well. And so you can have one sister up here while another sister is in the bedroom, while another sister is getting her hair cut, and feel the trauma of that. And also the weight of this dead white man's body kind of living simultaneously. And that's also thanks to, you know, the amazing other designers that we've also had an opportunity to work with. So like Yi Zhao, who does the lighting, Montana Levy Blanco, who did the costume design for this show. Like we're all kind of like working together about the whole,
and like I
mean?
feel
so,
like
that allows for that to kind of like balance out each other.
And those conversations are so early. Like Montana did like a beautiful thing with this, of the trajectory of color of clothes in the space. Like we decided really early on that like the set was going to be pretty devoid of color, you know, and E was introducing light color, but then Montana brought in this like yellow and this magenta in the two sisters' dresses that was like so out of what we've been staring at. And also like his costumes, while they all look black and gray, were actually also like a rainbow of black and grays. Like, you know, he had like those, which was just, I thought, like such a good way to then allow like E would take light out of those colors and kind of like fill the space with it. And you were talking about that early on, you know? So I think it's like, and I was privy to those conversations and part of those conversations, which is like a luxury, honestly, in our field nowadays, when most of it is spent on Skype. But you know, I think that that's like at the core of what a conversation between designers and a director should be, is one that's like holistic and involves everyone.
Exactly. Shout out to Justin Ellington too, who did the sound design. Okay, let's go on to the next show.
A little show called Fefu.
Fefu and her friends. Okay, people. So Maria Irene Fornes. Let's give it up. I hope you're laughing at home. Wake up.
Laughing.
Wake up. Nobody's laughing. But if you aren't, this is me sending you energy in life. Okay, so you know, she's an icon. What up, Michelle Roth, giving me that in my vocabulary. She's amazing, and her work is so rarely done. And she's also somebody who like so deeply thought about design in relationship to character, in relationship to architecture, in relationship to story. And so for me as a director, like the opportunity to kind of do her work was really important to me. Again, thinking about who's prioritized, who's kind of in the center of that work, and who gets to kind of have the resources of a kind of like highly designed universe. And so that felt really essential to me. The other aspect of it is that there's this huge freaking challenge of trying to put a house in theater for a new audience, right? And then also, not only that, but because it's been so long since this production has had an off-Broadway production in New York, you're like, what does it mean to kind of like revive this beyond my own personal love of the play, beyond like the questions that the play asks, beyond like the opportunity for like amazing actresses like Amelia Workman, shout out, wow, pew, 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 to kind of operate in this world. It's like, how do you make that feel alive? How do you like celebrate the event of that? And how do you make that feel alive? Because we are not going to ask people to get out of their seats unless it looks amazing. And so then Adam brought out all of this amazing research, right? Because the other thing that I felt like was important is like for me, what in all of the research that I've done, and like it's essentially felt like communing with like Maria Irene Fornes's ghost. You know what I mean? It's like, and thinking about her spirit and her personality, there was like vibrancy to it, right? There's like life, there's like aliveness to it. And when I think about Fefu, like there's a vibrancy and a like kind of aliveness. So I'm gonna keep rambling for a little bit, Adam, then you can go on. So when I was like, look, it's gotta feel alive, it's gotta look fucking beautiful, and we have to like earn the fact that people are gonna move around. Adam showed me this green room and I was like, yes, that's what I want. And why is it what I want? Because one, and if you disagree with me, you can disagree. You could be like, oh my God, I hate that green. I don't care. You know what it does? It makes you feel alive. It's got animal print. It's got pictures. It's got light. It's got vibrancy. Like you kind of want to go to that person's house, right? Like that, if that's the whole thing, like we're coming out to hang out with Fefu and her friends, you want to feel like you're inside of that house or like want to be a part of that house. Because it's also part of a character. It's like the organism of the women. Anyway, I can go on and on about Fefu and her friends. I'll let Adam talk about.
Okay. I mean, I think like, we, early on, we both kind of had this like irreverence for the process of this one of like, I think like historically, and this is like, I'm going to make a blanket statement and like hyperbole is poison, but like, a lot of plays that set in the 30s and 40s, oftentimes I feel get like a sepia tone wash over them, you know, that there's like this kind of, the past is warm and it's all wood and it's all like kind of yellow and it feels like rustic in a way. And I think like what I was so excited about this is that like I have this huge obsession with like Hollywood Regency and like Elsie DeWolf being from California, and like I and you are like have that Miami and those colors and you're always pulling from those colors, and I was like, oh my God, like Elsie DeWolf was like the designer I showed you, and some of this is Elsie DeWolf, some of this is other people, but like she was this like or socialite turned actress turned failed actress turned like interior designer who did like Marlene Dietrich's house, and like I'm getting really gay, but like I loved it. I love her work so much and have for years, and like Fefu was like the perfect opportunity for it, and it did everything that you asked for early on. I mean, I think the thing that was like so different about this process versus a lot of our processes was like we knew immediately exactly what it needed to look like, and there was no question about what it needed to look like for us. The challenge of this design was the ground plan and the audience and the fact that like, you know, it would be great in 2020 if you could afford to do a show of this size with a 30-person audience, but like that's just not a reality because of economics. So we like the scale that the audience had to be in the like the kind of theater that Tofana is, which is Tofana is like great, but like a fucking awesome space for something like this, but like to the scale that we wanted to do it, it was hard.
I needed like $20 million, y'all. Like, so if there's a wonderful patron out there that wants to give me $20 million to do it again at the Park Avenue Armory, I'll do it.
But it had like, what we ended up getting from it was like a height that like we wouldn't have gotten anywhere else in New York besides the Armory. And which was, I think really, you know, when we talked about, like we kept talking about a real space and a real house. And so we were able to make this like to scale house that actually in Tofana felt kind of small, you know, which is like, and we could kind of have this vastness outside of it, which was, I think, something we'd also talked about early on.
Well, I'll say this is making me think also about like your process too, or my process specifically with you, which is that Adam and I will sometimes go through like 7,000 ideas. Like the amount of drawings and the amount of possibilities that Adam like has been able to manifest is like a testament to his genius, but also like just like the difficulty of some of the projects that we work on, right? So like we went through like 700 different variations. Like I think Adam is right, like the aesthetic was super clear, but like the configuration was what was really crazy. And sometimes like going through the process of like hitting up technical walls or hitting up like ways in which we were able to like manifest one dream but not manifest another is like how we end up at like what's actually important and like what's at the core of the work. And like somehow in seeing all of these different like variations like manifested for me how important it was that the house kind of had a structural integrity. And not only that, but that also fed into the reality of actually being able to manifest all of the rooms simply from the cost of what it takes to build a room and kind of fill it. But like, oh, right, it makes you as a director, and I'm just thinking about how when you're as a director talking to a designer, to all those folks who are out there trying to figure out like, how do I talk to a designer? It's just like, what's actually at the core for me? You know what I mean? And like that the rooms intersect and that the rooms are connected and that like you can be separate things and have separate spaces that are all connected felt integral to like the understanding of like what's at the heart of the piece, you know, that we are all kind of separate parts. We can be different parts to different people, but somehow that togetherness makes us a whole. And again, interestingly enough, like thinking about like a space is both like a space of freedom and a space of imprisonment, right? And like, I think for Ness, setting it in this particular moment and thinking about structures and thinking about ways in which we kind of lived in our worlds and what was considered a safe space and a safe haven, considering like the pressures of an outside world like that, I think was manifested in how we ended up creating the ground plan. Do you want to go to the next slide?
Go forward. Yeah, so like I think with this project I really learned as a collaboration tool was like I know that we like practice empathy with characters and practice empathy with stories as like collaborators and practice empathy with like each other. And like I feel like we actively practice empathy with spaces as well. Like you kind of like acknowledge the flaws of spaces and like I feel like my goal every project, not just with you, is always to like make the set that people come into the room and be like, oh my God, it looks like it fits so perfectly. And I've never seen the space, or I've never thought of the space in this way, you know, which I know is a big thing you always talk about as well. And this one for me taught me that like you also have to practice empathy for like producers and the budget.
Oh, right.
But like, I think that like there's always going to be the realities of economics in any process and collaboration in American theater, or in all theater, honestly. But like, I think with this one, it was just like, instead of like, there were moments when we were like, this is such like a gargantuan task. What the fuck are we doing? You know, like whose idea was this, LILEANA Blain-CRUZ? But, and like, to Fonda's credit, they just like kept at it, you know what I mean? Like up until this one was like, it was like drafting was turned in and design was approved the day before rehearsals, like because we were just like pounding the pavement trying to figure this out, which I think is like something that some people, when I was young, I never thought about. That like I thought like, oh, you have some conversations, because it is like this formalized process we talk about. Like you have some conversations, you throw some research, you do some drawings, you build a model, the director says I like it, you show it to producers, they tell you the budget, you do a change, you build it. And this one was like, casting was happening, like rehearsal, like workshops were happening, calls were happening in airports all over the world, like trying to just like, I think I took like a production call like on a layover in Zurich while you were in, I can't remember where you, or you were, was it when you were in the mountains? I don't remember. And we were like trying to like still have like artistic conversations on top of just realities, because you never want to drop the ball and let it become this like rote, you know, numbers and thing. And so it's always the question. I know that like in our process all the time, and this one was very much that, like when they come back to us saying we can't afford it, make some cuts, you and I kind of have a bad, and I think really good habit of being like, scrap it all, you know, and start back from the core and like rebuild within these new confines. And a lot of times we end up at something very similar to what we had last time, but there's this like feeling of like, it's not precious, nothing's precious, like it's alive just like an actor, like break it down, build it up again, you know?
I think somebody said that the set in its own way is like its own character, right? Or like people have said that before, and I think that's really true. Like there's a aliveness to it, and like I think that's something that you're really amazing at, is like bringing up the liveness of a space so that it does feel alive, because why else will we be in the theater unless it was alive? Quick funny story in case you guys are wondering. It's not always like, yay. which is I think what you're talking about, you know, which is like there are difficulties, there are struggles, and it again becomes like the question of like what's important to you and how do you like express what's necessary for an event. So if you notice like in the picture with the ground plan and you see the group of people kind of coming together and looking down into the floor, like there was a big question for me about like Julia's room, right? And it was the one thing, like we literally had maxed out all of the space of the stage itself, even pushing out into the audience. So like when you've literally maxed out the possibility of all the rooms, where do you put the other room? And Adam, at the very beginning of the process, had been like, I think we should use a trap. And I'm like, I don't know about the trap. I don't know how I feel about it, right? And so we go into this whole thing. We had this whole notion where we were using all the balconies and there was like pink carpeting all throughout the audience. And we tried to have, you know, all these like folks sitting down on the ground. And then we had nightmares about people tripping over their canes and dying and breaking their hips. And then we were like, no, we need to come back to the ground plan. And I was like, well, the most important thing for me is that character, is caught in between, is caught in a space of limbo. And Adam was like, right, so like let's put her in the trap. And I was like, I don't know, I'm not sure. And then he, you know, for me as a director, sometimes I kind of just need to see the idea like sketched out. And Adam is really amazing at just being like, look, this is what it looks like. And I'm like, oh my God, that's cute.
It was one of those moments too where I was like, she can't go anywhere else, Liliana. That, like, you know, and the like the practicality.
But then it becomes like the next level of exploration, right? And so like another, you know, again, like longtime designers like Montana Levy Blanco did the costumes for this, and Palmer Hefferon is another designer that I work with a lot, and she, you know, was like, yes, we can totally do that. We can get headsets so that you can hear that character underneath the plexiglass. And that for me was like really exciting, and it's another way in which like other folks can kind of help think about the way in which the event unfolds. Let's go to
that's the other thing.
Green, right? Yeah.
Yeah, this whole team again, like, I think like speaking of like our shared vocabulary and like our shared aesthetics, this was like a moment of like true, wonderful, it was great that we had this like long history with Montana because he wasn't seeing a set design until rehearsal started. So he was having to like work on his own a lot. I mean, it was part of the conversations and research was shared with him and stuff, but like he didn't get the specificity that I think costume designers sometimes get from a set designer early on, since our process tends to start a little earlier. And like, it just like, it slipped right in, you know what I mean? Like, and Jane Cox was our first time working with her and she just like fit right in. And she was just like, I'm game for whatever. And it's just like, there's a trust, I think, that has to be inherent to like the collaboration. And like, you kind of have to like, let go, even though we're both earth signs and we don't let go, and Montana's an earth sign too. Like, we don't let go very easy, but like I think we've worked together for so long now that like it's easier to let go, but you always did let go early on. You just would like turn back and be like, but you got it, right?
Yeah. And I think also like in process too, like we discover things that we need, right? Like, so when we had for example, if you look at the room that was underground, like there was a question about like the lighting around the bed and like, how do we emphasize her? There was one iteration in which we wanted to emphasize the trap, right? And it was a question of the lighting, and then the light was just on her face. And then we realized, no, we kind of need to emphasize like the bed that she was in a way to kind of like illuminate her without necessarily also illuminating everybody's face watching her, to kind of allow the actress, Brittany, to kind of like be able to be present and also not completely consumed by the audience at the same time, even though she is being consumed by the audience. So we also allow for the possibility of experimentations once we're in the set. Like there were so many conversations about the kind of leaves that existed on the ground. Like all of these details become like essential to our telling of the story, which you know, but it's like it's like I don't think people I think sometimes people take for granted that like we had multiple conversations about the plates on the kitchen wall and how long and what color and like what that means and like how that tells a story about what this particular kitchen.
Well, this is even before, these images are before we added the ceiling to the kitchen.
Right, exactly.
You know, because it's still like the kind of like the plus that we got out of this thing being so delayed because of the like challenge of it was that we were able to kind of make these decisions in the room, which like Andrew Diaz, who did the prompts, was like a hero on for like
Yeah.
I mean, it was like every day, every morning he'd show up with like, you know, I'd give him a little bit of research and he'd come back with like 50 options and we would go through and pick out what we liked and then like build the space more. But it was like, it felt almost, this one to me almost felt like a film or a television set, just because we were like in the room while you were rehearsing in like the study. We were in the kitchen, like moving things around and redecorating, so that when you got to the kitchen for rehearsal, we were able to respond to the last time we were in the kitchen, which is like still part of the collaboration, you know,
exactly.
Part of the conversation.
Just to break it up a little bit, Adam, there's a question. What's your sign?
Oh, I'm a Virgo.
Yeah, Virgo. Do you know what your rising is?
My rising is Leo. And
I did not. How did I not know that? That's amazing. Oh, I did know that.
And you did know that. You love a Leo.
Okay.
And my moon is a Scorpio.
Yeah.
And Liliana Blain-CRUZ is a Taurus.
Taurus. Yes.
Is your rising Aries?
No, my rising is Scorpio. Scorpio rising, Taurus moon.
Double Taurus.
All right. Let's look at the next.
Yeah. It's the next project. We'll move
on. Okay, girls. So there was a question about like one like exploration, like what's the possibility of like how much you need to decide before you get into a process, right? And like what does that mean? And like I think that does influence design. I think that also does influence like how you work with like theaters essentially. And we're going to keep this a little bit short, this last section, only because I want to leave some more room for questions. But like Girls was like one of those joyous experiences. Girls, which is written by Brandon Jacob Jenkins, choreographed by Raja Feather Kelly.
Designed by Montana Costumes.
Yes, Montana Levy Blanco. Palmer
Heffron, lighting, Izao.
Okay, so yes, I am a Taurus, uno servida. Look at me trying to get everybody. I'm trying to incorporate the lives. Anonymous 10D, Daniel Crane, what's up? Alexandra Espinosa, Sarah Gordon. I'm going to get to these questions. So the main thing is we had a longer process with Girls. We're going to show the second iteration of it, but we had an opportunity with the amazing Princeton University to commission this play to work with students. And it's an adaptation of the Bacchae. And one of the things that I loved about what we found with Brandon and Raja is like finding a way to kind of center the Bacchae not on the kind of men that kind of operate at the center of the story, but how to kind of focus it on the women in the forest, right? And then when our second iteration, to find a way to integrate both those worlds simultaneously. The other thing that I loved about this opportunity is the party. It is literally a club on stage. And if you don't know me and Adam, we love to party. We've had our party days. Partying is its own sense of theater. And by partying, I'm thinking particularly of like club life. I'm thinking about club lights. I'm thinking about club design. I'm thinking about like the life of music and sweat and bodies kind of reverberating through space is like super exciting for me. So like this was like a dream project to kind of have happen and to work with Adam, who again is amazing at kind of integrating like that collision between the natural and the unnatural, which you can kind of see from this research here. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, so this was like the opportunity you never get, which is like normally you do it and then when you do it again, it's just like a co-pro and you're just like putting it in another theater or it's a tour or whatever. And this one was actually like a full realized like workshop, and it felt like a design workshop, which I just feel like you like never get to the production value that we got. But early on, I think this is an interesting example of like, I think as a designer working with a director, there's no problem with recycling research. I think that like, I think you shouldn't recycle all your research, but there are images that like become like intrinsic to like your system of belief, you know, in a way. And like, I think this one was fascinating because we did like kind of like we had this large like pile of research, but a lot of the kind of images we got in were things we had used for like an element in another show or like an idea in that show. And we kind of like brought it all together with this new research, but like a lot of Faustus research kind of crossed over, you know, even though I think they looked wildly different in the end. Like I think having a shared vocabulary is also like having a shared Rolodex of images sometimes, you know, and like references. So like, I know that the like third image over was actually an image from Faustus that we had used, is why I bring it up. It wasn't on the sheet before, but like, so it's just, and then that led me down the path of like finding the two that are kind of connected to it, to the left and the one down below it. But yeah, it's again, like, I think a fascination that you always have and we share, which is like this love for the natural on stage, and like it's kind of like, you know, you go into a living room play and like you understand the walls to be like real walls because they're built out of real material, but then you do a forest on stage and like it's this whole game of like, how real can you actually make it? How real can you make the rocks, you know? And like the suspension of disbelief is so much higher when you like put nature on stage. And I think, and then you and I both love to stick like TVs and neon and lights and then disco lights and mirror inside of that to like fuck with your perception a little bit of like, oh yeah, this isn't real. So we can go forward.
Yep. I think to answer some of the questions that I'm kind of seeing, I'm sorry I'm not able to kind of keep track with everything that's going on.
To pop them up,
to kind of like answer some of the questions about design, about like when we start like these design conversations. It can range depending on like when we find out about a project. It can happen, I would say generally like we start like almost a year in advance before like the project. Like we'll know like if it's happening in the season about almost a year, sometimes less, and we'll begin the conversations around there and start having conversations about the show. And then the designs tend to come in. When do they come in? Like when do you generally submit it before we start rehearsal?
For theater, it's like New York theater, it's usually like if I have a show in like July, I would submit prelim designs in like January, February.
Cool.
And then get to finals by like April. Yeah.
Amazing. So then, and then in terms of like the question, and we can talk about this in relationship to girls, which is like how much space do you leave for like being able to leave room for experimentation, you know what I mean? And I do think that that's like the difference between like being able to work in a devised, like where like all of the design things might be happening and changing in the process, right? Whereas in like say a space like Yo Rep, you have to submit it in advance in order for like the materials to actually arrive and in order for it to be built. So I think one of the things that you and I do also is we kind of storyboard through the major events and things that we want to hit, or things that are important to us and things that won't necessarily change, but like our essential like events that we want to happen, and then leave room for like dynamic between that, or how we get to that, or how that might change in relationship to
totally. I also think there's like, in working with you, I'm very upfront when we get to a theater and we do site visits and I do shop visits, that like part of our process is like an openness to change. And like we're both also like humans, and we've both done, you know, crews, and I've worked in shops, and I've been, you know, a props person, and that, so I understand the labor that we're asking people to do when we do changes. But like we're not, I'm very like we both try to be very transparent about the fact that like, you know, things might change and probably will change because we both really feel strongly that like the design cannot get in the way. You know, impediments are interesting,
exactly, but everything wants to be like playing with each other, right? Like that's the dream. And like that was what was so exciting and thrilling for me about Girls, is that like we had the opportunity to like live inside of a forest, but we also had the space and the freedom to like do kind of these crazy complicated dance choreography that Raja kind of made, or allowed for kind of the live stream video that happened with the Dion character, Dion like being a
we can go forward one more, we can keep talking, but then you'll be able, if you go forward one more, you can see there was like a room upstage that was like a live feed room that was like an apartment, or like a bedroom with a full bathroom and everything that was projected above.
Exactly. And Dion was kind of like the DJ Dionysus character who kind of created the environment for these women to kind of come into the forest. I'm discovering a theme here, which is women embattling the universe and how we are stuck inside some like oppressive regimes, and not only women, but just kind of like how there are oppressive forces that are kind of creating disaster and destruction and chaos and tragedy in the universe, and like how the exploration of those themes doesn't necessarily have to mean despairing theatrical experience. That you can actually have a dynamic, complicated, like visceral. I think that's another thing that you're really kind of amazing at creating, Adam, which is like a visceral landscape that then we can kind of that we are then allowed to kind of empathize with the characters inside of, right? So that we feel the pulsing of that music. We feel like that we're inside of that forest with E and the lights, like we are kind of immersed inside of that as best we can be in a kind of proscenium landscape, but that it is so alive that we get to be inside of it. Yeah. I think we're at 4 o'clock. I think we should go to Q&As. What do you think?
Well, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Do we want to answer some of these text ones, or do we want to?
I want to hear some people's voices. How you feel about this?
Hi. This is amazing. The pictures were so beautiful.
Yay.
You guys make me miss theater so much. Okay. We're going to try some of this live Q&A, right?
Woo! Mix it up.
Yes.
If you are interested in asking a live question, you can use the raise your hands feature on Zoom. So what I'm gonna pick, all right, so Trevor Catalano, you show up first for me. I'm going to allow you to talk and then unmute you for a question. So.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Welcome.
Cool.
Trevor.
Hey, I had one of the questions from the Q&A feed, which I think a couple people will be really interested in, is what does this world building mean to you, and what kind of projects are you planning as the potential for project budgets fall with losses from COVID in various different organizations? How is that challenging you, and how you're getting creative in that way?
Yeah.
That's the question.
It's a really good
hour. Go ahead.
I mean, I think like we were scrappy not that long ago. We're still kind of scrappy sometimes.
Yep.
And so I think like the freedom of, at least for us, like devised theater, you know, when we both first started, it was like you would rent the theater with your friend, and what you kind of found backstage was what like you had to make the set. So I think a lot of like taking that impulse of like the larger, more produced stuff, but thinking in reality and thinking about larger gestures and all of that. And it's just, I mean, budget going smaller is scary for sure. And the limiting of that is scary for sure, but theater survived it before, you know, and we'll do our best to still be exciting. And honestly, I find constraints like budget sometimes really thrilling. It's frustrating, but some of the best decisions I make are when shit hits the fan, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel, Liliana.
I think that question is not only in relation to like design and to like what the costs are of making theater, but it's just a question of like, what is the theater going to be when we come back from all of this? And I think that the truth is like the world is changing, right? And so how do we embrace that? Like, how do we not run away from the reality of this moment that we're currently experiencing? And how do we truly like use it as a moment to reflect about the world that we want to make as we come out of it, right? And I think that there's so many opportunities to think and ponder, and like using this moment of like silence for some of us, you know, who have the opportunity and privilege of being able to sit with the silence to really think about like what that means. I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is that it's not, you don't need like $20 million actually to build a world, right? So I did a production of Salome with LMCC, and we were basically in a dance studio. And I was like, I need to feel like, one, this kind of creepy party. I need to feel like where Salome lives in the center of it. And 3, I need like John the Baptist to kind of live in a kind of weird, slightly sacred, like slightly sickly space. And like Adam just took a kind of like fold out table and created like a really sad party. You know what I mean? For like Herod the king, he created this really beautiful like silver balloon bouquet for Salome that she sat underneath. Chris DeVita did the choreography for that, which was amazing. And then we had this one really sad, sad plant in the corner where John the Baptist kind of laid naked. And that for me is like, you can have very simple elements and build a really strong visual world with nothing. So I think you have to embrace, like Adam was saying, the environments, the reality of what you have to kind of create opportunities for the story that you're trying to tell. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, I think like the most beautiful production I've ever seen was an Uncle Vanya. I can't remember who directed it. You might, which was all fog. Like it was just a fog machine, and the whole set was just fog. It came to UCLA when I was an undergrad, and I just controlled one of the doors that controlled the draft. And like I was just told I had a headset on and they just told me to open the door and then close the door to like control the way the fog moved. But like, you know, the theater company showed up with like their fog machine and that was all they had. Like, so I think there are ways of challenging ourselves and thinking. But I'm going to be super fascinated and I'm excited to be involved in like rethinking what theater is. You know?
Thank you, Trevor. Okay, we have a question from Anya, who's Anya Pearson, and your hand is also raised. So I'm going to allow you to talk. Anya, are you with us?
I'm technologically challenged. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes. Hi.
Hello.
You're both lovely, and your energy is infectious and has made me so happy. So thank you.
Hey.
I'm
looking you in your eye as you ask me this question.
Oh no, are you really? Because I did not take a shower this morning.
No, it's fine.
We're just
I can't see you at all. Go ahead.
All right, well, let me go back and find my question. So basically what I was wondering about, this is mostly for you, Liliana, but I'm also interested in your opinion, Adam, is how much control do you have over the team and over the rooms? Like in terms of picking your own designers for each project? Like, do you have total control on each project? Does it vary by theater? Does it vary by region? I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, and a little bit about how you go about constructing the rooms. So like how you go about choosing the designers that you work with. And now that you're more experienced, you have kind of a team that you go to on a regular basis. But I'd love to hear about like the thought that goes into putting people together in that way.
Yeah, so one of the things that has been a lovely development as I've gone on through my years as a director is that like basically you're building trust, right? And like Adam said, you're also building trust with institutions, right? And so like when you're starting out like as a director, like I think theaters want to feel like they want you to feel the most supported in your endeavor because you're the most riskiest chance that they're taking in some ways when you're first starting out, right? And so they want to make sure that you're equipped. It's not out of a sense of necessarily control, but it's more out of a sense of like support that sometimes theaters are like, we really want you to work with somebody that we've worked with before, because then there's a trust and there's a kind of insurance in terms of like process that like at least things will get done, right? Because like as a director, you're like being asked to like lead a ship, right? And so you want to make sure that like whoever you're hiring on that team has like worked with the theater before to help support that. So like my first show at New York Theater Workshop was Red Speedo. I had like I had seen Ricardo. Ricardo had taught at YSD. I really loved Ricardo's work, and Ricardo had a long-term relationship with New York Theater Workshop. And so there was like a marriage of like New York Theater Workshop being like, yay, we love Ricardo, me being like, I love Ricardo's work. And so there was like a shared like ability to kind of like choose somebody on the same side. But at the same time, there's been a real, it's been really important to me to advocate for my peers, you know what I mean? And to give like designers an opportunity to kind of work, because like in some ways, like your peers are who you're coming up with. They're the ones that are sharing a learning experience with you. They're the ones who understand your aesthetic. They're the ones that like care about the things that you care about and envision what the theater can be. And I've discovered that the theaters that I've worked with have been really amazing, New York Theater Workshop included, at like championing those artists as well. And so as essentially like as my risk has decreased because like my shows have done well, there's been more trust in terms of bringing the teams that I want together. And to answer another question, which is like the importance of amplifying people of color and queer, you know, identities and stories, and like who kind of gets to operate that. Yes, that's really important to me, and how I structure my teams and who's involved in the room, because like we're all making this together. It wouldn't make sense to not have somebody who is as invested in like the art and the questioning of making theater as like my other collaborators, you know? And so for example, I know like Adam and Montana and Yi and Palmer, we all work well together. And so that will influence like the kind of event that I want to make with them. Like they felt like the right team to make a show like Girls, because they understand my aesthetic around like a club party and how I kind of want to shake a space, you know? Whereas like there are other shows that sometimes, like for example, you know, it's not because I don't think Adam was capable of designing the show, but it was because of a particular, look at his face. He's like, I could do anything, and he can do anything. But it's like, for example, with Anatomy of a Suicide, I felt it was important in that team to kind of bring, it's so specifically from a feminine point of view and a female lens that I felt it was important for that whole design team to be a group of women, specifically because of the way in which they would allow us to enter into a feminine psyche, which is essentially what I was trying to bring onto the space. And so that felt important for me in thinking about like, what is it, and what is the energy of people that are going to bring in the room? Like, what does the energy of a play need, and like how that works.
Yeah. I mean, I think like I turn down projects all the time because I'm just like, I can't get into this. You know, like I have no way into this script, and I'm super flattered that you want to work with me, but like, you should hire somebody who has a little bit more access to this. You know, I don't want to be faking it or phoning it in. You know.
Yeah, and I think those kinds of conversations are really helpful, both as directors and designers, to be like, what do I care? You know what I mean? To not do something just for the sake of doing something. Though for a young director, sometimes you just got to like take the leap and find what you love inside of it. But like as you grow in your career, like being honest with yourself about what has meaning for you is also really important. Yeah.
Dope.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Alejandro Hones, and he also has his hand raised, so I'm gonna allow you to talk.
Great.
Hello.
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 Hi, everyone. Thank you for putting this event together. It's been really enlightening. And one thing that I'm encouraged by right now is the energy that you are bringing to this Zoom call. You know, Zoom can—
Yes, because we're still alive. We're human beings. Okay, sorry, go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt. Hi.
It seems to also mirror a kind of energy that was probably in your process and your collaboration. And I was wondering how you find joy, whether it's personal joy or artistic joy, when working on projects that are tragedies. And if you could share a little bit about that, just kind of like, what does that mean in the rehearsal room? What does that mean when you're collaborating with designers? What does that mean, you know, to bring that joy, to bring that high level of energy when also dealing with content that is entrenched in trauma or tragedy, like Anatomy of a Suicide I thought of, or The Death of the Last Black Man are examples. But that's my question, and thank you so much. Glad to see everybody's help.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think, do you mind if I talk first, Adam, or you want to jump in?
Please.
So I think there's a lot of the work that I work on has tragic elements or tragic moments or deals with trauma of some kind, essentially because I'm interested in like power structures and how they create destruction, and like what does it mean to kind of work through them or break them down or watch them break down or watch them break the people that are living inside of it down, in the hopes that like us as an audience can question that and then hopefully change it. And so that for me means that we, in order to do that truthfully and to ask people to kind of go to those places, both as like designers and actors and any kind of collaborator, is to create a space of love, you know? And that's been really important to me. It's one of the reasons I think like we're drawn to theater, or I was drawn to theater, which is like it's a space of sharing and connectedness and empathy. We're literally asking people to imagine themselves or to feel what other people are feeling. And that is such a kind of powerful act, that act of empathy. So that I try to bring that into my process, right? Which means treating everybody like a human being. It's crazy. I think when I first started a long time ago, I was like, what is happening? Why are people being mean to each other? Like, why are people talking to each other? And I feel like we've moved past that moment. I think I've seen more and more, like there's a lot more engagement around like being in a healthy environment. People are less tolerant of kind of, I'm gonna say it, assholes, because nobody has time for it, you know? And so I think like there's a sense of like, how do we how do we engage with each other fully? Because if we're gonna, when and if we engage with each other fully, then we can be empathetic, not only with ourselves, but with the audience. And then we feel that there's a care being taken care of. And when people feel there's a care being taken care of, then there's a connection, I think, you know, that we're allowed to let our guards down and to feel together, which I think is like really, really important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I also think like Liliana, and most young directors that I work with now, I feel like are realizing this, but like you start with joy, like always. You start with like joy and you start with gratitude. Like, I think like, I know like every time I work on a show, I'm like incredibly grateful that I got to work on it. Like no matter the content, like this job is a crapshoot sometimes. Like, so just being in the room is such a gift. And Liliana does this great job of like managing.
Oh, you're frozen.
Safety. Am I back?
Got you.
This movement help. Liliana, like she, you know, she makes this a space where like you're free to feel joy, which I think a lot of times, like when I was younger, I thought I had to be very like stoic and professional and smart all the time. And she allows you to feel silliness, and she allows you to feel ridiculousness, and she lets you, you know, always respect each other, but kind of behave in this like large manner of large emotions, which then you feel safe then in a moment of tragedy to explore the large emotions attached to trauma and tragedy, because you've already kind of shared this like porousness of how we kind of communicate with each other and how we put our emotions into the room. And so like every day with her starts with like, even when knowing her very well now for a decade, you know, we'll have a meeting before and she's feeling a natural emotion of being upset about this or being upset about that. And then like when the room opens up, she's like, hello, everybody, let's come together, let's center, let's have joy, let's be grateful, let's look at each other, let's say thank you, let's, you know, and she thanks everyone for being there, which then just creates a room where everyone's like, oh, I feel safe and I feel taken care of, you know. You can always voice a concern with her, which I think makes, even when you're working on dark fucking material, it still is rewarding, like, you know.
So like opening with gratitude as an example.
Yeah, you know.
Or even like on a super simple level, like I like to start all rehearsal processes or even like meet and greets with like taking a breath together or like taking 3 breaths together and then running around and screaming and like all like, you know what I mean? Like, like that there's like, we're all in this together and the risk has to feel equal for all of us, you know? Like there has to be like an opportunity to listen and to hear. So I'm gonna share a story. I hope she doesn't get mad at me for sharing it, but I think it's helpful in hearing about like what it means to kind of go into like traumatic spaces. So Brittany, who is an actress who was asked to be under the plexiglass in the dark, right? And we were working in tech and like we had to figure out a lot of the ways in which to do that. But while everybody else was getting to kind of sit up on stage and kind of like be together, like she like, and again, we're working on all of these things trying to make sure that everything is working, but she's sitting in the dark, literally underground under a plexiglass, not knowing what's going on, right? And that for me, I was like, I went back and I was like, wait, we got to check on Brittany. And we went down there and she was like, I don't feel, Brittany Bradford, I did not feel, I felt like I was forgotten underneath here. You know what I mean? And that for me was like, no, I've betrayed her. But I was there. I listened. I heard what she saw. We made sure that she had a calm. You know what I mean? We were always connecting with her. We weren't keeping her underground if we didn't need to kind of work that scene. Like Adam and Jane were looking to find the lights that would make her feel safe inside of that space because she was being asked to go into like really deep, dark places of her psyche. You know what I mean?
By herself.
By herself, you know? And so like, I think part of it is also listening. We're not always going to have the answers, but like creating a space where like you're open to receiving and noticing and watching each other, I hope like creates a space for other people to be present, to be listening, to be watching out for each other, you know?
Thank you.
That's the world I want to live in. I want us to watch out for each other. I want us to take care of each other. Gosh damn it. Okay, thanks. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll take another live question. I'm going to just pick a name at random here. Nina Adams. I'm going to turn off your mic. Nina, are you with us? Nina?
Nina.
Okay, I'm gonna move on, but Nina, put your question in the Q&A if you're still with us, and we'll try to get to it. Okay, Lila Becker.
What up, Lila?
Lila, are you with us?
I think so.
Hi.
Great, hello.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us today. I wanted to ask, you mentioned talking about creating changes sort of late in the game scenically, and doing that with respect for the labor of everybody who's going to have to implement those changes. And I was wondering how you balance the need to create a different kind of space with that respect. Like, how do you manage those conversations in a way that honors the labor of the people who are going to have to implement what you're asking for?
I mean, I think like Liliana and I both, we're not, I think there's, the first step is to keep the conversation small. And so, you know, Liliana will like lean over, or I'll lean over and be like, you know, I think the wall should be pink or whatever. And then it's about going to the, you know, the TD or the production manager and bringing it up first and acknowledging, like, I know this is a super crazy ask, but I'm going to ask you now, and I don't need an answer right now, but this is something we're feeling really strongly about, so that it can kind of happen in a, not in a vacuum, but in a way that doesn't have a trickle down or a ripple effect to people where they're like, what did they ask for? And then a lot of times, you know, neither one of us by nature are like iron fist people. We're very much like, it's collaboration with TDs. You know, on the first site visit, I ask if it's a shop and house, I ask them like what they've done in the past. What are they good at? Like, you know, what are things that excite them, so that I can kind of collaborate with the right people. And then it's just a game. It's an open conversation of, sometimes, you know, the no is a very hard no, and sometimes you can tell the no is like I don't want to say yes. So then you're asking about what the realities are, and you know, we're both always looking for like the largest picture we can get, so that we are making our decisions based on time, because there's labor, but there's also a limit to time. You can only ask for so many things in the tech process, and without like losing tech time. But yeah, it's a mutual respect, and it's also understanding sometimes a no is a no, you know.
Yeah. And I think in terms of like late in the process, I think we're, in terms of like what we know we want to happen in a show, like those core values don't necessarily change. So I wouldn't ask for like a plywood floor and then, like, you know, 2 days into tech realize, oh my God, I need it to be dirt, because one, I would have known that early on, and two, like it would be impossible and inhumane to ask people to like pull out the deck floor and put dirt, and likely impossible. I know that there have been times where those kinds of discoveries have happened, but I don't think in our process that's ever been the case. If that's your question about late in the game or late in the discovery process, you know, if that answers.
I mean, I think like we did with the carpet for Fefu, switch out like mid previews, we switched out the floor in a room, but there was also like, the request was made and was a long conversation about cost and labor and all of that. And the answer was just like, what is the easiest way for this to be achieved? And the answer was, we were gonna have to go through almost all of previews with the floor we had, and we could switch the carpet out at previews after like everything was done and the schedule had slowed down a little bit. So like, that's kind of the math you're doing, you know, and I'm not expecting people to stay overnight and do things, because that's just not healthy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lila. All right, we heard from Nina about her question, which is about how what both of your relationship is like with the playwright, and what is their role in this process.
Yeah. So we work with playwrights that are alive, and we work with playwrights that are dead. So that are dead. Shakespeare is dead. And we did whatever we wanted. Just kidding. But we love playwrights. I mean, it's another kind of like collaborator in the room. It's another like source of inspiration and fun. Like Brandon Jacob Jenkins is like a longtime friend and playwright that I've worked with. And like Brandon has a lot of opinions and feelings about design too. He's just as interested in the kind of like totality of the event. And so when we were making girls, like Brandon would be like, but what about this? And what about this? And how does this work? And like, what if it's a rock on the stage? And me and Adam would be like, it can't be a rock on the stage. What are you talking about? But at the same time, we're like, oh, but like, what if it was this? You know?
What if it was a rock on stage?
Yeah, but what if it was a rock on stage? And what if we had a lot of boulders? So like, in some ways, it's like, it's more fun for the party. And like, there's also ways in which like, things that may not be elucidated like in the dialogue itself might be revealed by the playwright about what they were thinking about, what's happening emotionally in that moment, or like what that meant. And so like that becomes a source of information for us to play with and talk with. And it's another
I also think it's like, it's at least for me exciting to be involved with the playwright and have a playwright in the room and like find ways that design can answer some of the questions they're grappling with. And I like, you know, I've worked on so many new plays with Liliana, and then like, I remember at my grad school, like Yale, you get a design at the rep, and I worked with Sarah Rule and Les Waters on Dear Elizabeth, like the first production. And like, I was in there for early conversations, and I had this big design idea that ended up getting incorporated into the text and now has been done in every production since then. And there's something about like, you know, the nature of how fleeting theater is and live theater is. And as a designer, like our work sticks to just a production, and directors and playwrights can live on with work in a way and their influence. And it's nice when I'm working on a live piece and with a living playwright to have some kind of influence on something that continues. And, you know, I've gone and seen productions of other shows that I designed the original production, and I've seen the way that they've like responded to my design and responded to the things in the script that were designed integrated. And I find that fascinating, you know. And both Liliana and I have like a kind of like liberal arts, but like English books background.
So we like books. We like to read.
We like books. We like to read. We can both read. Did you know? And we so it's playwrights. You know, just having a playwright talk at me for an hour and a half, I find like really fun and exciting, and makes my brain fire in all the ways. You know.
Yeah. Cool. Should we do one more question? What you think, Rachel?
Yeah, let's do one more. Graham Schmidt, I'm going to allow you to talk. Unmute you.
I will allow you to talk, Graham.
I know, in a weird way.
You are now permitted to speak.
I want everyone to know that was not my language.
Allow.
You are now allowed.
This is
Graham, are you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you for this conversation. This is awesome. I love both of your work. My question is about when you're working with a canonical text, how deeply do you engage with like the production history of that text? Do you think about what has come before, or is that something that's present or central, or not something that you worry too much about?
So I think it's a question. It's like the like I'll give two examples. We've done Henry IV together, and then Fefu and Her Friends. With Fefu and Her Friends, like there was a little bit of daunting because it's like the last production that was in New York was done by Maria Irene Fornes, right? And so there's like this question of like, you had to acknowledge what she'd made and why she made it, and like what those decisions were, because that was like part of the engagement with the history of that piece, and it's like her history and like her legacy and what that means in New York. And so that felt like part of our process to kind of explore, and for me was a joy, you know what I mean, to kind of like think about that and sit in that, because I think so many people have their own relationships and memories and relationship to her, that like thinking about that and considering that felt an important part of the process. With like Shakespeare, I think that there's like, there's so many productions that have been done about Shakespeare that I think that like the question for me always is like, why does this story need to be told? You know what I mean? And what is the story you're trying to tell? Like this text has existed for so long, and if we're taking the time to do it and do the work to speak it and to make it accessible, which for me is really important to everybody to feel invited inside of the event, how do we do that? And essentially like you get, as a director, and I think also with Adam as a designer, you get to author what the event is and what that feels like in a different way. And so I'm rambling a little bit, but you know what I'm talking about, Adam. Talk about Henry.
I mean, I think like part of like design, going from like an educational place of like being trained as a designer, is like you learn the canon not only of text, but you also learn the canon of design. You know, you learn about the like, in the same way that we have Shakespeare and we have like Marlowe and all these playwrights, we also have designers that we are taught are like the canon of designers. And you look at their Chekhov and you look at their Shakespeare. And I think like with Shakespeare, I do engage a lot with past productions and past designs, just because there's so much Shakespeare's type of thing that you can read 3,000 times and you're still getting details. And so there's a lot of stuff that like, you know, design choices people have made are actually in the text and you might not catch it if you don't, you know, read it 3,000 times. So, but I think there's a fine line of how much you can let yourself look at stuff before it just gets too in your brain. So I think like with Fefu, we didn't look at photos, but we looked at all the ground plans because they're in the script, and we read a lot of the like writing around and interviews around, but like I didn't look at any pictures. And then when I ended up looking at pictures afterwards, we ended somewhere completely else. I'd seen one production years ago in Los Angeles and had a lot of strong feelings about it, but like I think like, I know a couple times, like when we were working on Henry, I was like, oh, well, there's this like, these people did this. And Liliana's like, don't show me, it's gonna get in my head, you know?
Yeah, I'm more sensitive to that stuff.
Yeah, you have to be really careful. And you also have to be really like, like porous and like let it pour over you and wash through you in a lot of ways. And you have to be ready to like, not steal, but reference, you know? And like, that's such a fine line that you walk, that I think that it's really, it's dangerous to get too marred down. Like I'm rambling, but like I designed Into the Woods when I was in high school and I just ripped off the Broadway show. And like, that's like a terrible thing. Like, you know, so you have to, like, but I was 17. So like, you have to be really careful about what you look at.
But I will say it has helped me with something like opera, right? Which, so Shakespeare I have a different relationship to, but like Faust is an opera that we did together. And like, it's such a long opera, like you do want to know like the history a little bit. I was like, what has the world felt like? And I was like, oh my God, it's so oldie-timey, Faust, like who are these people? And like, I realized that in some ways I'm in opposition to that. You know what I mean? I'm about kind of finding a way to like bring story into opera in some way. Like I like story. So I'm like, okay, like what is this like old time? I don't care about these people. Like, how do you make like how do you make people that you actually care of and make it like visually interesting and exciting in a way that like has access to folks? Yeah. So basically, in conclusion, because I see Rachel like being like, it's time to go. Make theater that's good. Where do you want to be? Don't let yourself be bored. Like this is a moment like to fill our cup, to read, to like think, to like feel, to connect to each other, right? So it's like, how do we do that? How do we think about that and like relish in the thing that we miss, which is the liveness of it, which is like the connectedness to other human beings and thinking together and feeling together about the world that we live in, right? Right.
Well, if we have time for like half one more, I want to pull something from Facebook as a good, as maybe
oh, right. What up, Facebook?
Hey. We're on Facebook too. But Facebook commented about just how much they love your energy and your joy and like that you are yourselves. And just, you know, are you ever in a position where people are slower to show you respect or take you seriously because of that? And how do you redirect that energy, and how do you stay true to yourselves and also navigate yourself inside of other spaces? Which is kind of a huge question, but maybe we'll take a small step.
Totally. So basically you're feeling like you act like such a fool. How can anybody take you seriously? Like you're singing and you're dancing, you're wearing a bright shirt. Like I look at you and I'm like, is she a professional? And the answer is yes. And I'll tell you why. One, you have to do the work. You have to do the work. You can't just come in being like, yeah, and not have an idea in your head. Like people, like this isn't a game. Like these shows cost a lot of money and they take a lot of resources and they take a lot of people's time. And so like that is also at the core and the center of like what we do, right? I don't underestimate or underappreciate what it takes to actually put theater on, you know? And it takes a fucking lot. And we know that, and we know how much it takes to put on, or those of us who participate as artists, and those of us who even might come to see the theater, like we know that it takes a lot to make this happen. And so when you operate from that space of understanding that this requires a lot of energy, a lot of human effort, then you have to do the work inside of that. So it's not just happy times, right? It's also like a really deep and rigorous investigation of the text, which is what I was trying to say about like dramaturgy, which is what I meant about like caring about your collaborators and knowing about your collaborators. It's what Adam's talking about in relationship to understanding your producers and doing the work with your producers and doing the research and having opportunities and knowledge about the work that you're doing. Because if you come in with nothing but joy and energy, then you're going to end up with nothing but like a lot of air, right? So you have to, it's absolutely essential to kind of like buckle down and appreciate the like specificity and needs of a particular play and a particular project. So like as much as like I'm bringing joy to it, it comes also, that freedom comes from a place of like knowing what the work is and having done that work before coming into the conversation.
You're joyful because you're on your shit. Like it's not a mask or like a smoke, you know what I mean? Like, and I think like just a really quick aside to that is like having been, designers are kind of in this position where we're with Liliana and we're with artistic, but we also get put into production a lot. And like, there are a few times, I think it's not just the joy, I think it's also like a young female director of color. And like, you know, the institutions are, when we get into other places, they're sometimes very like, you know, cis male white. And so I think sometimes there are these like guards up and this distrust, but like, I think what is wonderful about Liliana and wonderful about working with all the artists we work with is we trudge forward with like rigor and joy, and we break down those walls through just like knowing our shit and being on it and being prepared and being rigorous and having all of these parts. And it never comes from a place of like anger. It comes from like we just want to do a really good job. And we understand that there's a lot of responsibility being in a leadership role, that like our choices trickle down. And, you know, if we trudge forward and we have an army behind us of people on our side, then like the joy will take over eventually, you know?
Yeah. I think, you know, and there's not, and I will say that there is a journey, right? Like it's a trust journey too. So like when you're first starting out, again, thinking about folks who are at the beginning, people don't have any reason to trust you. So like that level of freedom doesn't come until you feel like you've engendered that trust, or people have seen your work in order to engender that trust, or you create a space because of the work that you've done. But I remember when I was first doing my first Shakespeare show, Much Ado About Nothing, and I had a group like that had some younger folks who were starting, and I had some older veterans. And this man, you know, because I was asking him to do something really crazy, because Much Ado requires like the father like potentially shoving down his daughter, and he felt really uncomfortable with it. And I pitched this idea, and this man yelled at me, "That's stupid!" Like in the middle of the rehearsal room, literally looked in my face and yelled, "That's stupid." Now I had a couple options. I could fight, which I wasn't gonna do because I was. You don't do that. You don't hit people. Don't do that, everybody, right? Or I could break down, you know, and like retreat into myself. Or you can answer the question, right? Because it's coming out of a place of fear. It's coming out of a place of, why are you making this choice? It's a moment of resistance. I don't think particularly eloquently expressed. I thought kind of disrespectfully expressed. But if you get at the root of what is actually the issue here, the issue is you don't understand this choice, and you want to understand what this choice is coming from. And I can tell you what this choice is coming from because I've thought deeply about this moment and what that means, right? And if you can let people know, if you can let your team know and your company know, like the deep reasons for why this is happening, then they'll be more willing to kind of trust you and engage with you. But this dude, and again, there's like some deep misogyny. Sometimes people don't like being told what to do by young women. I'll tell you that much, you know, like you have to break through that. And by the end of that process, because I wasn't afraid to engage with him, in another world, there might be other people who'll be like, not acceptable, can't deal with that, don't want to deal with that, never going to deal with that again. At that moment in time, I was like, I respected him enough as an actor, and I understood, because I was listening to where the place was coming from, that I could essentially engage with him about why the choices were being there. And by the end of that process, I had really engendered their trust, and they went to really kind of insane places about the show. But there's not to say that there isn't always going to be resistance. And you're right, not all air and joy and happiness does not always serve certain members of your collaborators. You have to like listen to what people need. You know, some people don't want the like, some people are like, please, can you just like calm down for a second? And you have to calm down. Adam just lets me like go crazy, you know, like kicks up in the air. And that's why we enjoy collaborating together. But yes, it's like you have to listen to the people in the room, and you have to be aware of your audience, and you have to engage with them in a truthful way. And like being quiet doesn't mean I'm less true to myself. Like, you know what I mean? Like combating somebody and expressing like moments of tension doesn't make you lesser than, it isn't taking away your truth. It's just engaging with like the real problems that happen sometimes, or questions that come up in the midst of playmaking.
It's about trusting other people, but also trusting yourself, you know? Like,
and also being afraid to like not know things sometimes, because I've had people be like, look, this I don't understand this, it doesn't make sense to me, and if I'm not able to articulate it, then I have to engage with what that means, and engage and offer opportunities for them to do some exploration work too, in order to have a conversation. Like Adam said, we don't have an iron fist. There's room for malleability, there's room for discovery.
Thank you both so much. There's some way more questions than we have the ability to answer right now, which I'm sorry if you asked a question we didn't answer it, but there's also so many people writing in just about how inspiring this was and how grateful they are, and I echo that. So thank you to Adam and Liliana. Thank you to everybody who's watching from home or wherever you're watching from. There were over 300 of us at some point today, so we've all been together. I want to do a quick plug for some upcoming virtual programs. So upcoming masterclasses, Mondays at 3. Next Monday, May 4th, is a cabaret workshop with Dito Van Riekersberg and his alter ego, Martha Graham Cracker. Hey. And the following Monday, May 11th, is with director, performer, songwriter Whitney White about tech.
Yes, Whitney!
So those are amazing. Please join us. We also have some fireside chat conversations. This Wednesday, April 29th, with artistic director Jim Nicola in conversation with Martha Redbone and Aaron Whitby, 2 amazing composers. The following Wednesday, Aaron Malkin, New York Theater Workshop's dramaturg, is in conversation with our Tao playwright in residence, Victor Casares, and Ruben Polendo, who is the artistic director of Theater Me Too, usual suspect, wonderful people. We also have a special event on May 8th called Singing for Our Lives, which is a virtual song cycle with Orion Johnstone. So amazing stuff. Please join us. All of this programming is offered for free. Everybody involved is compensated. The workshop has managed to continue paying our staff right now, which is really amazing. So if you are in the position to support our work, any donation, $5, $10, $25, would be appreciated and helps us to continue making work now and in the future. So you're going to see something pop up in the chat on Zoom and also on Facebook with a link to donate should you choose so, and also with a survey. We would love to hear from you if you were with us today about your thoughts. And all of this is on our website. So nytw.org has all this information, all the upcoming programming. Please keep in the loop with us, and thank you all so much for spending your Monday with us.
Yeah, thank you. Donate. New York Theater Workshop is the shit.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Liliana. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
See you later.
Thank you.